Lucy Beresford is an investment banker turned author, psychotherapist and media agony aunt. She appears regularly on ITV, LBC and the BBC. The Huffington Post describes her as a sex and relationships guru, but she also offers commentary on the public response to national disasters such as terror attacks. At her private practice in London, Lucy counsels high-profile people on how to deal with fame, addiction and the associated anxieties. Here she describes to me what she's learned about success from her deep insight into people's characters and how she's personally driven by the fear of appearing to be lazy. Lucy, thanks so much for doing this.
Pleasure.
You're a broadcaster and a psychotherapist. How did those two things come together?
It is a bit strange, and it's been very unplanned, I have to say, because I did English literature at university, then I went into investment banking, which was probably a huge detour. And then, surprise, surprise, I didn't feel terribly fulfilled after many years doing that. And so I did find myself in therapy, and I can just remember after that first session thinking, oh my God, this is so fascinating, so interesting. But even then I didn't think I would actually become a psychotherapist. I just thought I might study it. So I did an evening class, and then I did a master's, and then I thought actually this is absolutely fascinating. And also I do happen to be quite good at listening, paying attention and motivating people, kind of helping them change. So it's a career path that's kind of fallen into my lap without me trying to do very much about it.
But because you rejected investment banking, so you were flexible?
I think it took a long time to leave investment banking. There was a part of me that found it very safe, that found it was like a new family. We had a department of 200 and it was a very tight 200. And I also had some amazing experiences. I got to travel overseas a lot. I ended up carving out, because I was pretty rubbish as an investment banker, it has to be said. But I carved out a role for myself which involved a lot of dealing with the overseas offices, including India, which again became a really big part of my life, still is a big part of my life. So it probably took me about 4 years to leave. But when I did, it was actually a no-brainer. I was in therapy at the time. My bank had just been put up for sale, and I went running into therapy one morning saying, this is amazing. I might even be made redundant. This could be incredible. And my therapist, genuinely baffled, said, so why are you still in a job where you're hoping to be made redundant? And that was a light bulb moment.
Just a simple thought, which made you think.
Sort of a reflection of probably something that I thought about for a long time. And then I went in and resigned later that morning.
How did you end up then in banking in a job that you weren't right for?
I think at the time at university, the banks, the financial institutions were going to certain universities and pitching themselves and making themselves sound not just very attractive and very glamorous, but very meritocratic. And what really appealed to me was that if you worked hard, you could do really well. And I think that was something that was a philosophy that I'd lived by for a long time, at school, at university. Here was an environment that was saying, if you work really hard, we'll take you on. Also, I think at that time, the banks were looking for people with non-related disciplines. They wanted physicists, they wanted historians, they wanted English literature graduates like me. They weren't necessarily looking for people who'd done PPE or economics or maths, which was a bit of a problem really, because ultimately you are spending a lot of time, particularly in the early years, looking at balance sheets, and I can't really do that.
Were you also following a career path that other people expected you to follow, rather than something that you wanted to follow?
I think at the time it was what everybody was doing. A few years prior to that, everybody had gone into accountancy. By the time I was graduating, a lot of people were going into financial services. They weren't, for example, going into industry. I knew one person in my whole year who went to work for Procter & Gamble. So anybody else who was kind of trying to carve out a really dynamic career, that's what you turn to. What I should have maybe done is gone to drama school, I don't know. But, it wasn't anything that I had really been prepped for. It just seemed that it would be a really stimulating environment. And to be fair, intellectually, it really was, because it was picking off the cream of most of the universities in England, and therefore it was really exciting.
Someone younger who's thinking about careers and would desperately want to work in an investment bank, it's the pinnacle for many people, a bit like law or going into medicine. might be quite disappointed by what you're saying.
Well, funnily enough, I end up working clinically with people who have followed paths in their 20s, and then they get to about kind of 28, 29, and they wonder, why am I not fulfilled? Why is this not really turning me on anymore? And what they have to realise is that they've been seduced by something else, or something that's not particularly long-lasting, whereas in fact what they need to do is perhaps look deeper within themselves to try to work out what kind of person are they. So I think I did get seduced by this idea that this was the very glamorous, this was the year when Wall Street, the movie, came out, which kind of celebrated that whole culture, rightly or wrongly, and that's what we all fell into. Now I would look back and I think, why on earth didn't I pay attention to other sides of my personality, other parts of my skill set that would have been perhaps more nourishing? Having said which, the reason I chose it the reasons I went into investment banking were very valid at the time, and I got a lot out of it. It kind of did actually make me grow as a person, but also it pointed out what I wasn't good at, what I didn't want to do.
Yeah, because it helped you realise that, you needed to do something, follow your passion. And if you'd gone to a job you kind of enjoyed, you would have stuck with it.
I'd kind of stuck with it, and I'd have followed a very different life. Whereas I think it became that grit in the oyster where I just had to get out eventually. As I say, it did take 4 years, but ultimately when that time came, it was an absolute no-brainer.
There would have been other people that followed your path and did end up being happy as well. We don't want to say that investment banking's terrible for everyone. Did you notice other people enjoying it, and did that play into your decision to leave?
Yes, I think there were one or two people in the beginning. You get assigned mentors and you get encouraged to sort of base your career path on maybe their career path, particularly if you're a woman, and there were so few women in investment banking at the time. The idea was that these are your mentors, and if you can see yourself being like them, that would be fantastic. And I remember being in a meeting in particular with somebody who is actually a really brilliant, she's now a non-exec on several company boards, and I just remember thinking, I'm just so not like you. I don't have the same interests as you, and you have a different skill set to me. I wasn't actually that sure what my skill set was, but it sure as hell wasn't what hers was. And I still see her socially. She's a really lovely person, but we are so different. And I think that is another thing that's very important about finding that right path, is you do need to be encouraged. There need to be people who can help you bounce ideas around and ask you questions. Is this really what you want? Or are you getting sucked into, as you say, something that society expects or your peer group expects? Because it is quite hard. We're group creatures after all, and it's very hard to buck that trend, to go it alone if you can see everybody else around you applying for the same sorts of things. To stand up and say, this is what I want, is a harder thing to do.
But if I look at some of the super successful people I get to interview, a lot of them are rebels. They go against the grain, don't they? They're bold enough to do that. And you ultimately did that. You described how you went to counselling, but was it the fact that you reached a low that forced you to do that, or was there something stronger within you that pushed through?
No, it was definitely that I was getting to the point where I was just so dissatisfied with my life. So it came across as being disgruntled or quite angry. I'd sort of snap at people that I didn't even know, taxi drivers or people in supermarkets and things. And you can't live like that. That you have to wake up to that as being a problem. So I went into therapy to try to sort that out, and had those classic conversations where you say to your therapist, well, I'm here to look at this. I don't want to look at X, Y, and Z. And you can see the therapist thinking, well, that's exactly what you do need to be looking at. So I think I probably did get to a point where I had that position of self-belief that I had gained from having enough years in investment banking to think, no, I've got talents, I've got skills, now is the time to go out there and use them. And maybe it just took me a little bit longer than someone else who's got a lot, as you say, the mavericks, the entrepreneurs, the people who are self-starters. I've got that side to me. It just took a little bit of time to bring it out, or to give myself permission to bring it out.
And you're obviously open to opportunities, having been closed to opportunities perhaps earlier on when you chose banking, because you chose what was right in front of you, which was counselling, which is something you never even considered before. So how did you end up being open to that?
I think As someone who'd done a lot of analysis of text, of character in English literature, when I got to psychotherapy, which was all about, self-analysis, I suddenly realised that I probably have that analytical mindset, that it felt as if I was coming home, that there was absolutely no question about the fact that this was going to be a part of my life forever. I didn't know that I would actually also then have the skills to deploy that in a clinical setting, to actually help other people. But it turns out that that is something that I appear to be very good at. It's ended up being something that I write about. I've had my radio show on LBC. It just happens to be something that I'm good at. And I always remember a friend of mine who's also in the funny thing about the investment bank that I was in is that there were an awful lot of us who ended up leaving and doing extremely wacky things. So one is now a member of parliament. Another friend of mine is a pro golfer. It's almost like we all had to leave to go off and do something much more eclectic. But this person said, once you find something that you absolutely love and you're good at it, it never seems like work. It doesn't seem like you're having to work hard at it. And I think it's that flow that people talk about, when there's a beautiful synchronicity between your passion and your talent and your drive, your vision. And when all of that is kind of aligned, that's when things happen, that's when change occurs. And that's, I think, what happened to me when I found therapy. It's like, boom, change of direction, no question required.
But you wouldn't have found it if it weren't for banking.
Absolutely. That's why I can never rubbish the years that I spent in banking. Not only did I make the choice to go into banking for very valid reasons, which is something I worked on a lot in therapy anyway. Had it been a mistake? No, it wasn't a mistake. It actually was a really valid choice at the time. And it took me to this other beautiful path, which in turn took me back to writing, novel writing self-help, which in turn then led to my media career. It's amazing how when it works, it kind of follows on very naturally.
What's interesting is that I think a lot of people choose particular types of jobs they want to end up doing, whereas they should probably be thinking about the type of work they want to do and the type of environment, type of people they want to be with. And you have sort of stuck to your guns, haven't you? If your passion was literature and you're talking about characters, it's the same as psychotherapy. So actually it's not that alien to what you were interested in as a young person.
Yes, and funnily enough, what I'm often asked is, how on earth did you get into banking? Because it does seem so different to psychotherapy. But in fact, investment banking in particular is very much about relationships. It's about the relationships that you have with your clients. And I think that's what I'd got seduced into thinking, that it would only be about that. But there is some sense in which I've always been drawn to that interpersonal dynamic, that sense of interviewing somebody, drawing their stories out, giving them a chance to tell their stories. And therefore, in a funny way, I have ended up in the career that I've always meant to have, simply because it's about an analysis, it's about scrutiny, but it's also about telling stories. So I tell stories personally through my books, and then I also, through the shows that I do, give other people the chance to tell their stories too.
How did that step into broadcasting come about?
Well, very randomly, originally, when I was still training, I had friends who worked in the media and they needed people to comment. There was a very big story with the London bombings. As soon as that story hit, I had some friends who began to get in touch saying, well, we'd love some sort of analysis of, what might be going on in the minds of the terrorists, what might be, why has London managed to bounce back so quickly, all those sorts of things. And what I found was that I have that talent to be able to distill information or to tell stories quite cleanly, quite clearly, convey information in a non-scientific way. And over the time, it's just led to being, more of an agony aunt or somebody that comments on news stories in general, usually with that sort of psychological edge to it. After all, so many stories in the news are fundamentally about relationships, whether they're about, relationships of global politicians between each other, or people, how certain stories are affecting ordinary members of the public. There's always an angle.
Yeah, that's true. And those are the sorts of stories that the audiences most easily plug into as well.
Yes, because it's very clear that, for example, when it comes to sport, people can get the answers of the results of a particular match or an event very quickly, but what they really want to know is what went on behind the scenes, what has happened between various characters who play against each other. Is there real rivalry, or do they really like each other and they're just putting on the rivalry? People love that kind of thing. Because we're all human, and I think we see that relationships as pivotal to how we function in the world. So we're always curious to see how other people function. Are they doing it really well? Is there something I can learn from? Which is where we go back to the mentoring idea. Or are they doing it really badly and I must make a mental note, to not be like that celebrity or to not be like that particular athlete or whatever.
So have you now succeeded?
I would like to think that there's more to come. So I would never want to be complacent. I would love to think, I still regard my life as a sort of 9.5 out of 10 because it is pretty awesome and I really love it. But I'm always hungry for more. I think there's that part of me that's always a bit nervous about being bored. The sort of little girl living on her own with quite busy parents in a tiny little village where nothing very much happens.
Sounds familiar.
I just think that there's a part of me that is always looking for the next exciting thing. And I came up with this slightly naff phrase when I was in banking, which is when I decided that I was going to leave, what I wanted was to have an interesting life, which doesn't really tell you very much, but it tells you that maybe I didn't think that I was having that in banking.
Yeah, it tells you what you don't want.
Yes. What I didn't want was repetition. I didn't want to kind of just have to reinvent the wheel the whole time. So I'm super excited that absolutely every day I don't know what's going to happen next. Even on the days when I'm seeing patients, and as you can imagine, some of those patients I see at the same time every week. So that's kind of locked into my diary, but every session is different. So every single day has got something to offer, which is very exciting.
What's your fear then? Is it the fear of boredom? Is it as simple as that?
It's the fear of boredom and the fear of being thought lazy. So that kind of inner voice that says, have you tried hard enough?
Who's judging you there?
Well, deep down it's probably me. There's a big projection there that I'm kind of looking back at myself that I haven't tried hard enough. And I think that probably goes back very early to primary school, where there was a cup awarded every week and I never won it. And somewhere deep inside is that 9-year-old girl that would love to still be winning that cup. Having said which, I hope I've done enough work therapeutically on that to not mind so much about it. But I think it still gives me that spur to keep saying, just keep trying, just a little bit more, keep going. And also I think it helps you when you get those setbacks. Because I think one mistake to make is to think that everything is going to be sorted by the age of 30 or 40 or 50 or 60. That actually you can always be growing, you can always be experiencing new amazing things. But you will also, as a result of trying things, maybe fail at them or get rejected, get turned down, things don't quite work out. And I think it's that bounce back capacity that is the key to your success. So do I feel successful? I feel grateful, but I don't know whether I am a success.
But you wouldn't be driven anymore if you had succeeded, presumably, because you've reached what you wanted to reach. You've achieved your goals.
Yeah, that's quite interesting because some of my goals are quite short term. Originally there was a dream that I wanted to write a novel and get it published. Great. Then I wrote a novel that's set in India, and my dream was to get it published in India. That got accomplished. That's fantastic. I wanted to speak at the Jaipur Literature Festival about my book, and I did. So there are these amazing little goals that I've succeeded in achieving, and all of those go to make me the grateful person that I am. And I think the key thing is just to be grateful about what you have, because there are going to be some days where those dreams don't come true, or that person doesn't respond to your email, or you feel that you're not achieving very much. So then you have to sit back. That's the moment to sit back and say, but there are these other things that I'm really grateful for. Gratitude, I'm sure, has got to be better, more important than success.
Do you think there's too much perfectionism around? I mean, it's always been around, but perhaps social media is putting this pressure on us more than before to be perfect.
Hugely. And not just social media, but the way in which social media reaches us, which is that it's all there. It's there the whole time, in the palm of your hand, on your phone. Or if you choose to, you could not escape it if that was how you lived your life. And to have those very airbrushed, very carefully curated images of other people's lives constantly being streamed to you can be very destabilizing and very unsettling if you think that's what I'm aiming for. I've got to try and be like them in order to reach this plateau of success. And that's the danger, is to imagine, because there is another psychological problem with that, which is that you're always comparing yourself to someone else. If that something else or someone else or that lifestyle is, as you say, incredibly varnished, incredibly airbrushed, you are always going to feel very dissatisfied. And therein lies depression, therein lies sense of failure. And we have to educate, and funnily enough, not just to young people, but actually older people who possibly aren't as tech savvy might still think that this is the way that the world is. And we have to educate people to say, no, this is not reality. This is as much a fiction as, a catwalk model on a billboard. We all know that that's a slice of fantasy. That's play acting. That's good. That's good to have that tapping into your playful side, your inner child side. But ultimately, if you can own your own dreams and not follow someone else's, you're going to have a higher chance of success, emotional success.
When someone comes into, obviously you can't divulge any details about individuals, but when someone comes into you who's clearly very successful, who you would argue was successful, and they're sitting there feeling like failures, what's the first thing you say to them?
My genuine first question is, what brings you here? Because you can never make an assumption about why somebody might be there. And as you say, and as it turns out, yes, a lot of my work is with people in the public eye. But I always treat these people as if I don't know them. And in many cases I might not do. They might be very well known or successful in a different sphere. But my first question is, what brings you to see someone like me? Because they then have to think about their own decision, their own choices, and it gets a dialogue going right from the heart of saying, let's strip away the fame, the labels, this identity that may or may not have been created by you or for you. What's led you to do it? And that can often be the most revealing question of all. And the most incredible thing about therapy is how that first session will get replayed for months, for years. The themes that come up in that first session really percolate throughout the whole of your work with someone.
When someone perhaps listens to this podcast and they feel that success isn't for them, they perhaps feel in some dead-end corner of life that they feel that they're not going to progress and make it, what would you say to them? Because my experience of meeting successful people is that they've got the same issues as everyone else. They've just had this way of getting through it and choosing to swim rather than sink.
Well, I guess there are two things to say there, because one of them would be, well, what is your definition of success? Because lots of people who, as you say, we might look at them and think, well, clearly they are successful, but depending on what drives them, and the example I often give is somebody who, for example, might be terribly successful, but what drives them is the fact that their father never came to see them in the school play or was never there to cheer them on at the touchline of rugby. And if that loss, if that wound is still unhealed 40 years later, nothing will ever make that person feel successful.
Even if they become aware of it?
That bringing it to consciousness is the first moment of being able to change it. Now, in the same way as you can't eliminate your past, you can simply learn to live with it. In a funny way, you wouldn't want to necessarily abandon that knowledge, because it has acted for so many years as a brilliant spur for someone's drive. Obviously, if they've had some kind of breakdown or if it has proved to be catastrophic to their well-being, then that's the time to possibly eliminate it for good. But in a funny way, if it acts as a spur to make somebody achieve and they're very happy with that achievement, then I would never want to kind of throw the baby out with the bathwater. But you talk to me.
So you can use fear to your advantage.
Exactly. Everything is a question of balance, though. If it becomes too rigid and if it becomes the be-all and end-all for you, and it's in the process ruining your relationships, ruining your relationship with yourself and making you miserable, then clearly this is a strategy that has outlived its usefulness. It's got you so far, but it's actually now getting in the way. But you asked me about somebody who might be listening to Cloutology and thinking, well, everybody else seems to be so successful, I'm not. I think it is about going back to basics and saying, but what would your definition of success be? And what are the things that you could do for yourself? Not blaming other people, not blaming your circumstances, not blaming the people that aren't getting back to you. What can you do in your own relationship with yourself to change your own attitude to your own life? Because a very interesting thing that I'm doing at the moment with the book that I'm working on, which is about learning to love your life. How can you love the life that you already have? That, in a way, is the secret to success, because ultimately it isn't going to be material things, it isn't going to be gongs or awards that actually define whether you're a success. Other people might think that that makes you a success, but when you're lying on your deathbed, what you will want are some probably much more simple things. What is it that would actually make you love your life?
Do you think some people also don't live a conventionally successful life, but are actually quite happy, and sometimes they feel a bit apologetic for not being successful, but actually they are successful, they're just not driven, and actually that's quite a good thing sometimes, isn't it?
Being authentic has got to be the most important thing. I think we're very ill-served by our academic culture around the world, which places so much emphasis on achieving things. You have to learn your 10 times table and your 7 times table. You have to reach these little minor milestones every single week in your scholastic career. Then you get out into the big wide world, and sometimes it can take years to realize you don't have to live like that. You don't have to constantly be trying to achieve in order to get affirmation, in order to get praise, because again, that's what we grow up with. We grow up with thinking, if I do this, then this thing will happen and I will get this nice thing at the end of it, whether it's a gold star or a hug from mummy or whatever. And ultimately, if you can find that source from within, and it could be somebody who loves surfing, if that's where they get their joy, their passion, and their sense of achievement at the end of the day, wow, how amazing, because that source is going to come from within, and therefore it will never leave them.
Yeah, and that's fine. Own that.
Yeah, to own it, to be comfortable with it. That's where social media could be really useful, because it could be disseminating many theories like that. And obviously a podcast like yours is helping people rethink what does success really mean, as well as how to get it. But I think at the same time, it's our responsibility to be positive about our own life and make our own life a success on our own terms, as opposed to what other people's definition might be.
Lucy, thank you very much.
My pleasure.